Welcome back to another episode of What is Truth. It is good to be back in the studio. I enjoyed the bush last time, but it's also good to be back in the studio. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Yeah, there's always something different to nature. Just sitting there outdoors, enjoying the fresh air, the sunlight, and all of those important things. But being back in the studio, it's also very exciting.
It is. It's almost like we had a nice little break in the bush. You know, we spoke about health and all of that. I really enjoyed, discussing those elements as well. But today we're back in full force, I would say. Hey?
Well, this is one of the questions I've been hoping for because it's such an important topic, and people need to study this and understand what's it all about.
It's definitely a question we've been waiting for. And finally, someone has asked a question. We've answered this lady before with another question. So I think let's dive right into it and see what it's all about.
Hello again, Robert and Marlou. This is Roxy again, and I have more questions for you to answer on your platform. And I know you touched on this a little bit in one of your episodes about no buy, no sell, but it wasn't really gone into. So my question is, what is the mark of the beast? Who is the beast, and what is his mark? We all know that there are many ideas floating around out there for centuries now on what the mark of the beast is. Is it somebody going to have 666 written across their forehead? Is it a chip that they insert in your hand? There's all kinds of rumors and ideas and false doctrines about this, and it's time we clarify this because it's so important that people know what the mark of the beast is. And the Bible is so simple that a child could understand it. So if you will please answer this question. I know that heaven will appreciate it because this is something that we really, really need to talk about. Thank you, and God bless you. And I'll probably be seeing you again soon with more questions.
Thank you, Roxy, for that detailed question. And yes, I believe if we follow the guidelines that God has given us in terms of how we should study the Bible, and if we ask the Holy Spirit to be present while we're studying the Bible and ask Him to help us, I believe that a child could understand this. Yeah, and the mark of the beast is obviously a very important topic. It's the final test that will come upon this earth, and it's not just about avoiding this mark, whatever it is. Our lives should be in order. Before, it's not about identifying the mark and your life is not in order and you're just going to bypass the mark and you'll go to heaven. Hey, it's about your life. Your lives should be in order and right with God, and we should always be reading and asking God to guide us and for discernment, so that we will be able to stand when it becomes hard in the last days, when the tribulation is upon us.
Yeah, that's so true and very important. You can know what the mark is, but if you don't understand everything around it, if you don't look at your life and see what's going on, why you're living a certain way, and etc., then the knowledge of what the mark of the beast isn't going to do you any good. You need to know why and how and what's the whole thing behind it in order for you to say, okay, I want to accept it or I don't want to accept it. So knowing what it is important, but knowing why not to accept it is, for me, even more important than that.
It's first that relationship and with God, and that passion to want to know what truth is. Hey, because if we expose this beast power and his mark, you may reject it because you're not living for God. So it won't really make any sense to you, and thus you will be like, whatever, it's got nothing to do with the mark. Like she said, the mark is a barcode, or it's a chip or whatever, or maybe it is. We still need to find out. But yeah, today, Marlou, we are exposing Satan's proxy.
Yep.
We exposing his character to some degree. So I guess we need a lot of prayer before we start this this journey.
Yeah, we definitely do.
Yeah. Will you pray for us?
I will.
Thanks.
Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for another opportunity where we can study your word, and where we have a very big and important topic that we're going to discuss today. I want to ask you that you will guide us with your Holy Spirit, that whatever we say, whatever we read, whatever comment is made, that it will be through your guidance, that it will be the words that you wish us to speak and not our own words. And I pray that this will go out into the world so that many people can see what it's all about, so that they can be able to make an informed decision as to what's going on. Is this something that I need to accept, or is it something that I need to reject? And I pray this in Jesus' name alone. Amen.
Amen. It's very important that we that it's not our words, hey?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't say this enough, but look at the evidence that we will be presenting today, and see if it aligns with the Bible and where we are in the stream of time. So, I hope all of you will go on this journey with us, because it's definitely not going to be a one episode journey. We obviously, the question was, what is the mark of the beast? Okay, well, we need to understand what the mark is, but wait, what is the beast? Who is the beast?
Yeah. And we can read the 2 verses in the Bible where it talks about the mark, and then we can probably go from there and ask those questions. But who is the beast? Like you said, why does he have a mark? What's the purpose of that?
Yes, and we'll dive quite deep into this, because I believe it's very important. And as you all know us, we like to really dive deep into questions and to the Bible, and see what complementary and supportive documents say about this topic. But I guess let's start off with Revelation 13 verse 16.
Yes, and we're going to read so many Bible verses today. I want to encourage everyone who's watching, who's listening, to also grab your Bibles and to study along with us.
Yeah, we would like to go step by step, and starting in Revelation 13, where the beast is spoken of, and cross-pollinating with other books in the Bible is what we are going to do today.
Yeah.
So, cool. Revelation 13:16. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him that understands count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666.
Yep.
Yeah, so it's interesting to note, first of all, and we'd like to go through this line by line, that all walks of life, anyone out there, both small, great, if you had many riches or you were poor, whatever the case may be, they can all receive a mark in the right hand or in the forehead. So don't want to go too deep, but usually your right hand is your hand that you do most of your things with. If you're not left-handed, I guess it's predominantly right. And it's basically your actions. So there's an action. You either get the mark through an action, whether you believe or not, whether something is right or wrong, maybe through because of fear or deceit or whatever, you execute and you receive this mark, and then can either be on your hand or on your forehead.
Yeah. So what's interesting is the either. So it can be in one or the other one. So it doesn't have to be in both.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And your forehead is you believe the lie of the serpent. Whatever this is, the mark, you believe it, and you've been so deceived throughout your life, and you haven't given your life to God, so you don't actually know what truth is. You've never learnt or never asked God to lead you.
Yeah.
So you believe the lie.
And the choice that you make is going to have consequences. You are going to be affected. And we see those consequences in Revelation 14 as well, what it says there, when we do accept the mark and worship the beast.
Correct. And just before we get to 14, obviously it says that no man might buy or sell. And that's what Roxy was talking about.
Yeah.
We discussed it briefly last time. But this is the result of disobeying the powers that be. And there will be economic consequence to this, and if we are not rooted and we don't have a foundation, which is Jesus Christ, then we are going to really struggle to not buy or sell, not have any food. Who's going to take care of us? That's a faith that of Jesus, that one needs to really inherit.
And it's interesting when we get to this topic, because you will get a lot of people in the world out there who says, but no, this isn't going to be true. There's not going to be something like that because you have human rights and no one will be forced
Fifth
to
Amendment.
do this. Yes.
All of that.
And we look after one another, etc., whatever the excuse may be. And then I just think back a couple of years ago where there was this pestilence that came into the world, and all of a sudden, overnight, everything was shut down. You weren't allowed to go to the shops unless it's essential. You're not allowed to go to work unless it's an essential work. So basically, the governments of the world shut down the entire world in a matter of days.
No one saw it coming.
No one saw it coming. So if that can happen, then why wouldn't there be something like this where there's a mark that is going to be implemented that has the same effects as what happened a couple of years ago?
It's so easy. It can happen overnight, and they can call a national emergency. They can override authority. They can institute martial law and all these things, and that happens overnight. I remember just being shut down 6 years ago. I was like, how did this happen so quickly?
Yeah.
Hey? There was before that, before the pestilence, I would never have thought that you won't be able to drive from A to B. How's that possible? How are you going to close everything? It's, we don't actually understand how easy it is for the powers that be to control us.
Especially economic-wise. How can they shut down this factory or that factory or whatever because the country's economy isn't going to be able to handle it? Well, it happened for a couple of months where people couldn't go to work.
Yeah, and don't believe a lie. CBDC, all of this. No, it's great. It's there because of theft. To avoid theft and all of that. Think along the lines of the mark of the beast. The end times. Why are they putting all of this in place? So if you're talking about economic, it's what is the consequence or what is the reality of having the CBDC? You can switch someone off if they don't abide by your rules, by your laws, your statutes. They can just click and it's gone. AI coming up, all of this is detrimental. All the chip in the brain. What is it called again?
The Neuralink.
Neuralink, yeah. So they can that's great. They make it sound so great because you can now heal maladies and paraplegics and all of that. But think about the consequences. Think about why Satan will introduce all of these things into the world.
Yeah, and even if you disagree, your voice doesn't mean anything. You can disagree, but they just continue with whatever they have implemented.
And as soon as they have enough people that wander after the beast, as it says in Revelation, and they agree with what they say, then they can just call on natural law. You know, they just you don't, like you said, you don't, your voice is no longer heard by anyone. And then there's a small minority called the remnant that will be persecuted in the last days because they are different from the rest. The rest have been so deceived that they believe a lie.
Yeah.
And the remnant has nowhere to go but trust in God.
Yes, and on that note, let's just read Revelation 14:9-12. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark in his forehead or in his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. And he shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment ascended up forever and ever. And they have no rest day nor night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receive the mark of his name. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus.
We should have bolded that last line as well, hey? Commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And the commandments of God, keeping them is an outflowing, as we've said before, of the faith that we have in Jesus and of Jesus. So how important is it to also link the mark of the beast with the commandments of God?
Yeah, as Jesus said, if ye love me, keep my commandments. So that plays an important role in this whole environment that is being created at the end of time.
Yeah. And then we can do a whole study on all of this. You know, commandments equals love. Commandments equals his character. In the last days, why are some people going to accept the mark? Because they're fearful. So there's no fear in perfect love. You know, we can join all of this together.
Yeah, it's there for protection as well.
Yes, the commandments, a barrier. So we don't have to analyze everything and decipher what's going on here. But I mean, it's always difficult to read the wrath of God. You know, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God. The wrath of God is purely because of us, because we separate ourselves from God. We mustn't forget that. The wrath of God only comes down on those who will not believe in him and whose probation has been closed already. We mustn't disbelieve the love that he actually feels for us.
Yes, and we did a whole episode on it, Does God Kill? In one of our first videos already. It's a long time ago now.
First 4 or 5, yeah. No, that was good. And so this is the mark. Okay, we first need to identify who this beast power is, because how can we know who the mark is if we don't understand who the beast is? Yeah. So Revelation 13 verse 1, and I would like to take it step by step. Revelation 13:1, and I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. Wow, that's a very fully loaded verse, actually, and it's so short. Now you have you have this beast rising out of the sea. What does that mean? And then this beast has 7 heads, 10 horns. What is the meaning of this? And upon the horns 10 crowns. So there's some rulership here. Crowns, kingships.
Yeah, and people can now go and say, I think it means this, or I think it means that. That's not the way to read the Bible. We should let the Bible answer and interpret itself.
Yes.
So we need to go and see, what does the Bible say about a beast, about the sea, about the heads and horns and the crowns, and not just say, this is how I feel and I think this is what it should be.
Yeah. So, I mean, upon his head is name of blasphemy. That gives a very big clues already. Hey? It's what is blasphemy? It is putting yourself in the place of God. And what did the Pharisees accuse Jesus of? Hey? Forgiving sins, which is only attributed to God himself.
Yes, and they wanted to stone him as well because he said he and the Father are one.
Yeah. So, very nice clue. I would love to expand on it and tell you exactly who this person, who this beast power is. But keep in mind, there's a usurper here.
Mm.
Okay, so now, what is a beast in prophecy, in the Bible? Let's first get that definition.
Yeah.
And we go to Daniel 7, verse 17 and 23. These great beasts, which are four kings, which shall rise out of the earth. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth. So let's not dive into what it's saying here. I just want to show that a beast is a kingdom. Or a kingdom. Yeah.
Yes, and again, this is so important to let the Bible interpret itself, because when I look at this, I remember watching a documentary when I was still in the Pentecostal church about this beast that rises out of the sea. And in that documentary, they said, but it's a literal beast that is going to come out of the sea. And I'm like, okay, that is going to be pretty amazing and scary at the same time, because how is this going to look? It's something completely different. You have no idea how that actually is going to look. And then I thought, but in that time where I was in the Pentecostal church, this wasn't really explained to you. There wasn't really Bible studies going through Revelation and Daniel and things like that. And I got most of my information from documentaries, or for instance, the movie that they made, Left Behind, that was based off a novel and not a thing based on the Bible. So that's what they do over there. They fill you with something that seems plausible, but when you actually study it out and you do a study like this and see that the Bible is interpreting itself, you realize, okay, but that's not true, all of those things they tell you.
Sure, then it explodes, hey? Because, and that's what's interesting is I grew up primarily in the Seventh-day Adventist church, and you didn't, so you have this different angle. I've always known who the beast is since I grew up and I was in the church, and you came with all these different ideas and ideologies. Hey?
Yeah, where you had no idea that a beast actually means a kingdom.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like,
because you've never learned how to hear a little and there a little and read it in that way. And it was never actually meant, and that's what the other churches say, to be understood really. Isn't that true? The book of Revelation. They almost see it as a fiction type of story book.
Or a closed book. Like later on we will be shown what it actually means and how to interpret it.
So why are these books like Daniel and Revelation written in symbolism and things like that? Because, let's take Daniel for example. If he wrote all of this down and made it plain, 100% plain, what would have happened to these writings if they were reading this? Let's say Babylon is reading these writings of Daniel, and it's made plain as to what is going to happen and what is going to happen to Babylon and all of that. They may take it away and destroy it. So it was also written in symbolism so that it was kept intact over the years.
It also adds another layer of authenticity, because now you have someone in Daniel saying something that opens the door for something else in another place in Scripture. So this isn't something that can be thought out by a human being. This shows that the Scripture was divinely inspired.
Exactly. And it motivates us as the reader to study the Bible. And it's for those who really put an effort in to understand the Word of God. To understand what's happening and to share it with others. And I guess, like I said, there's a little bit of cryptic, it's a little bit cryptic, but it's also to preserve it over time.
Yeah, so now we have a beast, and we know that the beast is a kingdom. So now you have a kingdom that comes out of the sea. So what does that then mean?
So let's allow, again, the Bible to explain this to us. Revelation 17:15, and he said unto me, the waters which thou sawest, where the horse sitteth, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. So you've heard about the chaotic seas. It's also, it's symbolism for people. When you have war and all of this, the sea has got to do with multitudes, dense population, dense populated areas is what the sea refers to. Yeah.
So then this means when we look at Revelation 13 verse 1, that there was a kingdom that came out of a place where there was a dense population on this earth.
So we have two clues. This beast power is going to speak blasphemy against the Most High. There's going to be blasphemy written on its head. And it comes out of a dense population. Okay? So we're getting there. But the second part of 13 verse 1 says it also has 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns. These 7 heads refer to the powers that governed and influence this beast power who we're trying to establish over time.
Yeah.
That's what the 7 heads denote.
Yeah. And what's also interesting for me is this beast that we're talking about in Revelation 13, that's described here with the 7 heads and the 10 horns and the crowns. You also have a similar beast in Revelation 12 and 17 that's described the same.
Yes.
7 heads and 10 horns.
But there's a change.
But there is a change, yeah.
Yeah. And so let's go back to Revelation 12, verse 1 to 6, and we read. And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. So this woman clothed with the sun. So what is a woman in prophecy?
Well, the Bible clearly shows us as well. One verse, for instance, that we can have a look at is Jeremiah 6, verse 2, which says, I have likened the daughter of Zion to a comely and delicate woman. So we have all of these references where the people of God, his followers, his church is likened unto a woman.
Yes, and clothed with the sun, the righteousness of Christ. So it is his church. Woman is a church in Bible prophecy. And the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. 12 symbolizes the church. Yeah. So, and she being with child cried, travailing in birth and pained to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon the heads. Okay? So what is the difference between what we are reading here in Revelation 12 and what we read in Revelation 13, verse 1?
Where the crowns sit.
Where the crowns sit, yes. So, first of all, before we get to that, so this woman, this church, and back then the nation of Israel, through David, through to Mary, gave birth to a child. And that child was
Jesus.
Jesus Christ, yeah. And then this great red dragon came, having 7 heads, so it's the same, still the 7 heads of Revelation 13, and 10 horns, okay, and 7 crowns upon the heads. Okay, so during the time of Jesus, who was ruling Israel at the time?
Well, that was Rome. Rome was ruling during that time.
Yes. And they ruled till 476 AD. So during this time, Satan was keeping Israel in bondage and persecuting the saints through his proxy or through his servant, I guess, on earth, which was pagan Rome. Yeah. But if you look at the 7 crowns, it's on the heads, and in verse 13, it's on the horns. So what does it mean if these 7 crowns were on the heads of the beast? So it must mean, because during this time, the world was ruled through Caesars. Okay, and we'll look at the kingdoms that followed in Daniel now. But during this time, the Caesars ruled. Okay, and later, the crowns went onto the horns. So it was no longer the Caesars that ruled.
But now you had the monarchs of the kingdoms that ruled.
Yes. And we can give a little bit away. It was in Europe, okay, where the monarchs were ruling.
Yeah.
But we first have to dive into Daniel to understand this a little bit better and to understand who these kingdoms were and when they reigned and how it came to this point where Jesus was born and pagan Rome was in charge.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we read on, and his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, so the third of the angels that he took with him, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered to devour her child as soon as it was born.
Yeah.
So what happened here?
Yeah, well, just before we go to that, I just want to mention we don't have to sit in confusion and wonder, but who is this dragon that they're talking about? Because if you read just a few verses later on in Revelation 12, it clearly says that the dragon is Satan.
It is quite well known that the dragon is Satan. It's not something we need to expound on, really.
Yeah.
But yes, the dragon is Satan. And at this point, Satan, through pagan Rome, was waiting to devour the child, to destroy the child. So isn't this what happened during this time where Herod the Great wanted to destroy all the firstborns?
Yeah, he was an official of Rome.
Yeah. And because of fear, losing his position, he said, wow, is there another king that was born? Let's kill all the babies, every one of them, so that we are 100% sure that we've destroyed whoever this potential king is.
Yeah. And a bit later on in Jesus' life, when he was taken captive, where did the Sanhedrin take him to?
To Caiaphas and to Pilate.
Pilate, yeah. So there Rome is involved again.
Yes.
And who placed him on the cross? Whose seal was placed on the grave? Who guarded the grave?
The Roman soldiers.
Yeah, so you can see how Rome was involved in here, doing the bidding of Satan.
Yeah. And she brought forth a man-child, we read on, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. This was after his death. He went back to the Father because he had no sin in him, and he had life in himself to resurrect. And the woman fled into the wilderness. So come on, this is the picture, the woman, the church was persecuted. 70 AD happened, rebellion against Christ, and some of them obviously fled between the siege of Cestius and Titus. Titus came there. He put a standard in the holy place, and it was a terrible ordeal. Parents ate their own children. Children took food away from their mothers. It was chaos. But those who had faith in Jesus, between the two sieges, which were 3.5 years apart, they fled. And they got away. They went into the countryside, out of the city. The woman fled into the wilderness. And this is not just during that time, but there was a lot of developments after the 70 AD, and you can read also in all the churches, Ephesus and Smyrna and Pergamos and all of this, the timelines, 30 AD to 100 AD was the first church, and then you have 100 till 313 AD, which was Smyrna, and God had nothing against Smyrna because they were persecuted heavily, and it formed their character. It strengthened them as a church. But I don't want to go through all the 7 churches now. But the third church is important, Pergamos, because they compromised. And they fled into the wilderness, and you have your Valdenses, and you have your Albigenses, and your Huguenots, and all those during the time of big trouble, during the Dark Ages and all of that. So that's what happened, where she has a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. That is 1,260 days. We'll get to that. We don't have to discuss that now, but that is a time prophecy for how long the woman fled into the wilderness, and we'll see why.
Yes, that's quite a prominent time frame because it comes up a few times, and we'll get into it, like you said.
In different ways.
Yes. And when we go on and read the second verse of Revelation 13, it says, And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and great authority. So now we have a few more animals being incorporated into this beast that we see.
Yeah, and that's another clue.
Yeah.
Blasphemy, out of the sea. And now we also read here the dragon gave him his power. Remember we said earlier the dragon gave pagan Rome his power to persecute the child, the Son of Man, Christ. But he couldn't. Obviously, Jesus escaped that death decree. But yeah, so again, we're getting closer. Think about it. So if God gave pagan Rome that power and his seat and great authority, who is this beast power? But they're giving us clues. And these clues that we have here now in verse 2 will take us directly to Daniel. Why Daniel? You know, if we read in one of the most prominent books in the Bible, Matthew 24, it mentions Daniel. And it says in verse 15 to 16, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. God wants us to understand this.
Yeah.
And the abomination of desolation is something we won't discuss now. It's linked to the mark of the beast. But remember, Jesus said, your house is left unto you desolate. And what did that mean?
Well, basically, because of his people, his church, rejecting him and turning away from him, he said, there's other people who's going to search, who's going to come to me. And that nation that was placed to be a light for everyone in the world isn't going to be the light anymore.
Yeah.
That's going to be shifted to
Spiritual Israel. Yes, yes. So exactly what I wanted to hear. They were void of Christ. And if you're void of Christ, you are separated from Christ. And then things happen and you can't explain, like what happened in 70 AD. They were void of Christ. He said, your house is left unto you desolate. They had no more connection with God. Only a few of them. I wish I knew the exact number that flew between Cestius and Titus, the sieges. But yeah, so let's go to Daniel and see if they can give us paint this picture more clearly for us regarding these beasts.
Yes, Daniel is a great place to go to. And the reason why Jesus also speaks about Daniel in this chapter is because it is pertaining to the end. It is pertaining to end time events.
Yeah.
So that means when we want to study the things that's going to happen in the end, we need to look at Daniel as well.
Yeah. He gives us a chronological order of what happened because he was in Babylon.
Yeah.
So in Babylon, that's where his reference was, Babylon, and he looked forward.
Yeah.
You know, where the seal at the end will be opened. There's only one that can open that seal, and that's Jesus Christ. But that's not our study today.
Yes. So Daniel gives us the key to understand all of the other prophecies in Revelation concerning the end time.
And Daniel initially didn't understand even these prophecies that were shown to him in vision. You know, so he had to go through a lot to actually understand these prophecies well. So we are thankful to him, obviously for God showing him, but also for him writing this down and showing us this prophecy because this is key.
Yeah.
Okay, so Daniel 2 verse 31 to 34, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. I believe everyone will remember this. It was an image, and he asked these wise men and his astrologers and all his wise magicians to interpret this dream for him.
But not only interpret it for him, they had to tell him what the dream was.
Yeah.
What makes it so more amazing what actually happened there.
Yeah, so they had to tell him what he dreamt.
Yeah. and then interpret
it. So long story short, they couldn't. Obviously, it was a dream from God. And Daniel was the one who prayed to God. And he said, please show me the dream and interpret it for me, God, so that I can go to Nebuchadnezzar and explain it to him.
Yeah.
And we read from verse 31, 2 verse 31. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. Okay. Also remember that this, every time we go to the next section of Daniel, there's a little bit more information. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Okay, so that's all we know. We've got a picture of what it looked like, but no additional information really. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet. Okay, so you have this image, and right at the end, it's succession. So it's head, chest area with the arms, and then your midsection, legs, and then you have the feet of clay and iron. And a rock that was cut out with human hands hit the feet, and the whole thing tumbled.
Yeah.
Okay. So right at the bottom you read, and the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So that's a clue on its own. So this stone that hits the feet of this image, it fills the whole earth at the end. Okay.
Yeah. And what's great about this is you don't have to go and try and figure out, okay, but what does this now mean? I have no clue what fits in where. The Bible literally interprets this dream for you.
It does. You just need to read on.
Yep.
Continue reading. If you have to, read the whole Daniel, get a picture of where he was in Babylon, how he preserved himself from the king's table, the food from the king's table, how the faith element came in, how prayer was important to Daniel and his friends and all of that. So I would obviously recommend reading the whole of Daniel, but this is now the portion of what we're looking for. So next we read in Daniel 2 verse 38, thou art this head of gold. So first he just said, this is the image, this was your dream. But now he interprets it a little bit, just painting a little picture there. Thou art the head of gold. So who's the head of gold?
King Nebuchadnezzar.
Yes.
So that's Babylon.
Babylon, exactly. King or kingdom. So yes, Nebuchadnezzar. Yes, Babylon. So Babylon. Yeah. And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee. Doesn't say who. And another third kingdom of brass. So the inferior one is silver, the third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. So that's my second piece. That's the second piece of, colored in here. The first one just said it was clay and iron.
Yep.
This one says it will mean divided kingdoms, divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong, partly broken. Okay, so it gives us that information. And this is the final, this is at the end times. Okay, this is what the feet symbolizes, a divided kingdom. But the iron is still present. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. Okay, so that is a little bit more information. God of heaven set up a kingdom. Yeah. Okay, so when that rock, God is our rock.
Yeah, so when Jesus comes the second time, he will set up a kingdom.
Exactly. So we've got Babylon, the head, and we've got the rock at the feet. I'm not saying the feet is God. I'm saying the rock is. So we've got Babylon, and we know who's going to be the victor. So we've got the outline, we've got the skeleton.
Yep.
Yes. So just to show the viewers the statue. So the head of gold is Babylon, and they reigned from 605 to 539 BC.
Yeah.
Now I remember in 605 BC, Jehoiakim, K-I-M, was the king of Israel. And that was the first siege of Babylon, and they took a lot of captives to Babylon, and amongst them was Daniel and his friends. Yeah. And then they took items from the temple in 597 BC, and then in 586 BC was the second siege and final siege for ancient Israel.
Yeah.
So anyway, just a short thing there, but from 605 539.
Yes, exactly. So if that first part of the statue represents Babylon, and the next one is another kingdom that came up after it, so that means what kingdom then ruled that entire area after Babylon? Which kingdom conquered Babylon in order for them to rule?
Do we have to find this in the Bible, or can we just go to history?
Well, it is in the Bible as well, but we can just go to history also.
Now, before we even get to the Bible, who conquered Babylon in 539 BC? So so these were the Medes and the Persians that merged, the Medo-Persians, and the Persians under Cyrus the Great conquered the Medes in 550 BC. So, and then they merged and became Medo-Persia, and then they conquered Babylon. And Babylon was unconquerable almost, impenetrable. But we know the story, we can tell our viewers.
Well, the city had everything they needed. Their walls were extremely high and thick.
They were something like, I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was somewhere along the lines of 14 to 16 meters thick, wide, deep, and high. Yes. And there was the river Euphrates running through it.
So they could defend themselves. They had enough water and supplies to live for a long time, to provide food for themselves. And then they had to come up with a plan to get into that city. So what they did is the Medo-Persians diverted the river, and they went through the gate that was at the river, and they walked in and they conquered the city.
Yeah, the gate was open. They left it open because they were all inebriated. They were drinking, they were celebrating, and they used the utensils and the cups from the temple of gold and all of that. And there was written on the wall, God wrote with his finger, what was it?
Mene, mene, tekel,
Upharsin.
Upharsin.
Yes. And then the gods left the gate open. They were enjoying themselves so much. And then the Medes and the Persians got in there and they conquered Babylon. Yeah. And it's interesting. It was silver. It's an inferior metal in terms of costliness, in terms of its cost, but it was a harder metal than gold. And the interesting thing about Cyrus, he had one of the largest, I think it was the largest at that time, empire in the world. It stretched from the Mediterranean Sea to the Indus River, and they had an interesting messaging system, and they could deliver messages across that whole region with horsemen over time. And that's actually where we get the name Media from, is from the they were called in the Bible Media and Persia. Media, Persia, Medo-Persians. And we can move this along. After Medes and the Persians, they reigned till 331 BC. The swift killer came along, Alexander the Great. And he was Greece. And he conquered them in 331 BC. I mean, he was young. He was 32 years old. But he also had a massive empire. It's also spanned from Greece to India, connecting East and Western cultures. And we know about Greek mythology. And we may divulge into that in our next episode as well, a little bit into Greek mythology. And he expanded his rule over roughly around 2 million square miles. So these were massive kingdoms. Massive kingdoms, and they were conquered obviously by Rome during this time. And they conquered for a long time, 168 BC till 476 AD.
And what's amazing for me is God showed Daniel the future. He showed him things that would still happen. And now we sit here in time and we can look back and we can see exactly the way it happened, the way God said that it will happen. And ever since that power, that lost power, Rome, divided, there wasn't one kingdom anymore. There wasn't one ruler anymore.
You'll see many tried to unify Christians, unify Europe. You know, when you look at Charlemagne, he was the king of the Franks and later Holy Roman Emperor. He aimed at uniting Europe under a single Christian empire, recreating a form of Western Roman unity. He failed. If you look at Napoleon, he also tried to unify Europe under France. And what do you think Hitler did? You know, he did exactly the same. He tried to unify in both. Well, Hitler wasn't in World War I, but in both times, almost they tried to unify and combine the German-speaking countries under one regime, and it failed. You know, he won't allow it to succeed.
Yeah, and Napoleon was successful. He was busy doing everything and busy conquering, and then Waterloo happened. Hitler was doing the same. It was amazing how he was busy conquering the countries surrounding Germany. And all of a sudden, he decided to divide his troops, things he said he wasn't going to do.
Yeah,
and
he went into Soviet Union.
Yes.
And then they came from, he was divided.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then he failed.
And back to the feet, while we're here, they are divided. You know, divided, but they are seeking unity. And it may seem in the last days, right at the end, that there will be unity, but it will be incredibly short-lived. And then Jesus will come. Yeah. And if we jump to Daniel 7, verse 3 to 8, it gives us more information as to these beasts. Okay, and it says here, and 4 great beasts came up from the sea, diverse one from another. Okay, so they all came out of populated areas. Okay, 4 great beasts. So who are they? We've just mentioned all 4 of them. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. Okay, the logo or the symbol, whatever, for Babylon was a lion. Okay, had eagle's wings. It was majestic. You know, I beheld till the wings thereof were plucked, and it was lifted up from the earth and made stand upon the feet as a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And behold, another beast, a second, like a bear, and it raised up itself on one side, and it had 3 ribs in the mouth of it between the teeth of it. Okay, so the 3 ribs, they conquered Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt during this time.
And what's also amazing is how it says it was raised up on one side. So this shows how accurate the Bible is also, because the Medes and Persians weren't equal.
No.
One was stronger than the other one. And
Cyrus
here it is
was
depicted.
the Persian was above the Medes. Yeah, that's it, exactly. And they said thus unto it, arise, devour much flesh. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Alexander the Great, Greece, 4 wings, 4 heads. 4 heads were the 4 kings of, after Alexander the Great died. He had 2 ICs, 2 generals that took over these areas. And they were called Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. Okay, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. But these 4 quadrants were Macedonia, Thrace, Syria / Babylon, and Egypt. So that's the areas that they conquered.
Yeah. And you had the 4 wings that shows swiftness, like you mentioned earlier. So that entire kingdom that Alexander the Great conquered, he did it in less than a decade. That is insane if you think about the area that he had to cover with his soldiers, and they had to fight and conquer the different nations in that area.
Exactly, and it's all here. It all depicts it in symbolism to a degree. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, now we're getting to to the crux of the matter here. The fourth beast, dreadful and terrible and strong exceedingly, and it had great iron teeth. It devoured and brake in pieces and stamped the residue with the feet of it, and it was diverse from all the beasts that were before it. And it had 10 horns. Remember we read about 10 horns in Revelation 13, Revelation 12, the crowns on the heads, and in Revelation 13, the crowns on the horns. Yes, so we're linking the two together now. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Okay, so there's a little stout horn power, okay, because horns also signify kingdoms in Bible prophecy. So there was a little horn coming amongst these 10 horns. So who were these 10 horns?
Yes, and just before we get to who those 10 horns are, let's just read on a bit in Daniel, because we don't want to interpret anything out of ourselves, because the Bible interprets it for you. We just need to read on.
Yeah. So Daniel 7 verse 17, these great beasts which are four kings. Verse 19, then I would know the truth of the fourth beast. Okay, here we're talking about the fourth beast. That's where I want to get at. Which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, teeth were of iron, his nails of brass. Okay, so we know this is Rome, okay, the fourth beast. So we need to talk about Rome. Teeth were of iron, nails of brass. I know this is eisegesis, but to me, nails of brass is, you cling, you rule over. Brass is almost like Greek, Greek theology. So you have that mindset of Greek theology embedded in the iron. That's just as my thinking. Yeah. It's not in the Bible anywhere, but it's interesting. Which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. Okay, and of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the others which came up, and before them 3 fell. Okay, so of the 10 horns, 3 fell. 3 horns were devoured, were destroyed. Even of that horn that had eyes and mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. So this small horn wasn't destroyed.
No.
It's actually speaking of, this is the main issue. No. This horn uprooted 3.
Yeah, this one was different than the others.
Yes, and more stout. Yeah. So it had more influence. I beheld, and the same horn made war with the saints and prevailed against them. This was the little horn persecuting the saints of God. Until the ancient of days and judgment was given to the saints of the Most High, and the time came that the saints possessed the kingdom. Thus he said, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon earth, which shall be diverse from all kingdoms, and shall devour the whole earth, and shall tread it down and break it in pieces. Remember, it shook the residue off its feet, that terrible beast. And the 10 horns out of this kingdom are 10 kings that shall arise. And another shall rise after them, and he shall be diverse from the first, and he shall subdue 3 kings. That is the stout little horn that will uproot the 3 kings out of the 10. So there will be 7 left. Just making it as plain as possible. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until time and times and the dividing of time. So now we've got 2 time prophecies that we will link soon together. We have the 1,260 days that we mentioned earlier. Yeah. And we have time, which is 1. Times, which is additional 2, that's 3. And dividing of time, 3.5. 3.5 years. So what is the picture? Paint the picture for me here, Marlou.
So basically, after you had Rome, after you had that kingdom of iron that was ruling basically everything, that divided into 10 different nations with 10 different kings.
Yes.
And those 10 kingdoms were the Visigoths, the Franks, Burgundians, Lombards, Suevi, Anglo-Saxons, the Alemanni, the Ostrogoths, the Vandals, and the Heruli. So these were the 10 kingdoms that formed, the 10 kings, and the 3 of them were uprooted. So the Ostrogoths, the Vandals, the Heruli, those were uprooted, and they were completely destroyed and obliterated. We don't know much of them. All we know is what the conquering power tells about them.
And can we believe that conquering power?
Well, that's up for a lot of debate.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Well, seeing that it's close to the beast power, I don't know if one could just believe what they say about them. Obviously, these 3 kings or powers threatened this little horn power.
Yeah.
So he wanted to get rid of them. But we are trying to establish who this little horn power is. And it's not a good power. So that's why I'm saying they must have questioned their authority. They must have had Christian values, I would almost say. I don't know. I'm assuming because we don't have any information on them. So, but they were uprooted. And if you want to compare this with modern day, I guess, location, when you look at the Visigoths, you've got your Spain, France, Switzerland is your Burgundians, Italy, Portugal. They're a little bit different than today, but similar locations. So this was Europe, okay? So you had 7 major horns or kings left after those 3 were uprooted. And obviously this little stout horn kept on growing and established itself amongst them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the Bible also shows us exactly who the second and the third kingdom was after Babylon.
Yeah.
Just to show that it's there. We don't want to go into too much detail. But in Daniel 8:3 it says, "Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had 2 horns, and the 2 horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the other came up last." So it's the same as the bear that was higher on the one side. It's the same thing. 2 horns, Medo Persia. One is more stout than the other. And then we'll just read the bolded areas in Daniel 8, verse 5 to 12 and 20 to 21. The goat. So there was a goat that came to ram this ram, okay, to destroy this ram. What does it say about the goat? So I'm going to preempt, or I'm going to say already, this is the kingdom after the Medo-Persians, which is Greece, okay? The goat had a notable horn between his eyes, and he came to the ram that had 2 horns, Medo-Persia, which I had seen standing before the river, and ran unto him in the fury of his power. Okay? He smote the ram in verse 7 and brake his 2 horns, and there was no power on the ram to stand before Alexander the Great. That's basically what it was. Verse 8, therefore the he-goat waxed very great, which he did. In history, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones. Okay? So we've got this picture of what's going on.
Yeah, previously it was the 4 heads of the leopard beast. Now you have 4 horns.
Yes. It's a different vision, just to prove, to show them exactly, who these powers are. And if we go down to verse 20, the ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media Persia. Okay, and the rough goat is the king of Greece. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king.
Yeah. So basically, the only thing that you don't know about that statue is who is the kingdom after Greece. But because it was set up so nicely that you can see from history for yourself that it is no other than Rome.
Yes.
No other power can take that place.
There's no other power, yes. And Marlou, we left out verse 9, which just refers to Rome. We can just quickly read there. And out of one of them came forth a little horn. And this is out of the 4 winds, which waxed exceeding great. So it's again exceeding. Every time it says exceeding was Rome. Toward the south, toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. So remember, this kingdom, Rome, came from the west. And it conquered Egypt to the south, and Asia Minor and Syria to the east, and obviously the pleasant land, which was Judea, which was Israel. And that clearly shows as well that this is Rome. So Daniel 8 is very clear, verse 5 is very clear as to who these powers were, just to cement it.
Yeah, so isn't it wonderful how the Bible repeats itself in different ways but it tells you exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
So there's no confusion as to what it means. You can't say, okay, Daniel 7 means this, and then Daniel 8 means something different now. And then Daniel 2 means something completely different than to the other two chapters. Each one aligns with one another.
Exactly. So finally, Marlou, Rome was deposed by Odoacer, who was from the Germanic, he was a Germanic chieftain in 476, and he deposed Romulus Augustulus. Okay, so he was the emperor at the time, the last Western Roman emperor, and then Odoacer allied with the next emperor, the Western emperor of Rome. So he didn't destroy Rome completely. He allied with them in a sense, with Zeno, and Zeno became emperor until 491 AD. So yes, Rome lost its imperial power during that time, but it wasn't completely destroyed.
Yeah.
But what crept in? Okay, this is pagan Rome still. So what crept in the 300s, in the 4th century?
Well, you had an emperor who became a Christian. And from that moment on, he tried to unify the people again. He tried to get pagans and Christians to worship together. So there was compromise that crept in.
And this was the third church of God that allowed compromise to enter into their religious systems. And Constantine obviously started making laws, and like you said, and brought paganism into this garb of Christianity, and completely distorted true Christianity during this time. And there were a lot of laws that were made. So during this time with Constantine, and how paganism and Christianity evolved together, obviously he convened at the Council of Nicaea, he convened with bishops, and they looked at the disputes over theology in the church and all of that. And this evolved over time. And imperial Rome, or pagan Rome, then soon morphed into something greater, which was this stout little horn.
Yeah.
So now we're getting to the question, what was this little horn power?
Yeah, so we're looking at this time frame of where this little horn comes out. And what gave this little horn his power? Because you had Constantine, you had this pagan Rome that still had a lot of say in the world. So authority, yes. And when we go to 533, we have Justinian, who said the following. Writing to Epiphanius, Patriarch of Constantinople, stated that he had written the above letter to the Pope, repeats his decision that all affairs touching the church shall be referred to the Pope, head of all bishops, and the true and effective corrector of heretics. So the Pope was to decide who is heretics and who should be persecuted because of what they believe or what their reason may be.
This is, how did they get to this point, Marlou? How did they get to a point where they can appoint someone as the corrector of heretics? It must have been through the time of the bishops, through 100 AD to this point, with Constantine coming as Christian, the compromise of the third church. You know how important that part is for me? Looking at compromise. If you look at compromise throughout the ages, it's incredible. Even Hezekiah, the king of Israel, compromised with Assyria and pulled the gold from the temple walls to give it to Assyria until he realized what he had done. Yeah. Compromise is the worst thing you can do. They got to this point because the nations, the world, believed in their cause.
Yeah.
They believed that what they were doing is right because they had deceived them over 200 years. From Constantine to this point, they're already in their hands.
And the devil was using any means necessary to empower him. As we read, that who gives it its power? It is the dragon that gives him his power. So we have Rome giving Papal Rome, the Pope, its power. And behind that sits the dragon.
The dragon sits behind all of this. He's got a proxy on earth. He has his servants, and this is right through from Cain.
Yeah.
Right through from Cain till today, till where we are today. He has been using his people to destroy the world, to deceive the world, to create fear, and to dominate the people of God.
Yes. And here's another letter that is written by Justinian. And he says, to Pope John II, because you are the head of all holy churches, for we shall exert ourselves in every way, as has already been stated, to increase the honor and authority of your see.
You know what the date was?
I think this is still around 533.
So a lot happened just before this beast power received absolute power.
Yeah. And then you also have Pope John II, who replied to that letter, and he said, if we read the bold part, this see is indeed the head of all churches.
Where did this blasphemy come from? That they can be head of all the churches and be this representative?
Yeah, they misinterpret what Jesus said to Peter.
Exactly. And we also read in Signs of the Times, the word Peter signifies a loose stone. Okay? So Jesus said to Peter, on this rock I will build my church. And then they just blindly go and say that it's on Peter. Peter is the rock. He's a little rock. Petros. Right? The rock is God, is Jesus Christ, is the rock that he's referring to. So Signs of the Times says the word Peter signifies a loose stone. Christ did not refer to Peter as being the rock upon which he would found his church. His expression, this rock, applied to himself as the foundation of the Christian church.
Yeah.
Hey?
Yeah. Jesus
What heresy.
Jesus is the cornerstone of everything.
Yes.
So we can't take a human being and put him in the place of Jesus.
No. Peter was a servant of God. And then, now we come to when this power now actually came to fruition and it became a power. And in Ministry Magazine, there are quotes as well in here. It says, it is true that as the Gothic power was not at once snuffed out of existence, so the papacy did not spring at once into full flower of political and spiritual power. There were in those days popes and popes. Pope Silverius, if not an Arian, was at least suspected of sympathy with the Goths as against Justinian and his supporters. So in 537, this pope was deposed by Belisarius. Now, Belisarius was the general in command of Emperor Justinian. There being some question as to the authority of a military leader summarily to depose a pope, an appeal was taken to the Emperor Justinian, whose capital was Constantinople. The emperor sustained the action of his general, and the following year, 538, Schaff tells us, Vigilius, a pliant creature of Theodora, wife of Justinian, ascended the papal chair under the military protection of Belisarius. And that's quoted in the History of the Christian Church, Volume 3.
Yeah.
So this is where it received its power by the dragon in 538.